Hi, I'm Tim Barton.
And I'm David Barton.
And we're back with another lesson on Footsteps to Freedom. Now, we've talked about systems of government. We've talked about philosophy of government. We've talked about a lot of things with government, and we've discussed America some. And we thought, let's talk a little bit more about America and see what in America has been successful, what has worked really well, what are things that could be applied in other places that might work well, and what are things maybe that America is not doing well or historically hasn't done well. And so certainly throughout history, just like any nation, any government, there's definitely periods you can point to and go, that worked really well, that didn't work well. Even now we can look at a lot of nations and see things that are working really well and things that aren't working well. When you look at America, it's no exception. We can see the same things in America.
Yeah, you can. And there are areas in America where we have been really strong and we still are really strong. There's areas in America where right now, statistically, areas we've been strong in, we're very much sliding in. That includes many of our regulatory policies, what's called the Freedom Index. We're falling on the Freedom Index. You look at education. When you compare American education to results around the world, we're falling in that as well. So there's a number of areas where America is having trouble, but in other areas, when it comes to creativity and prosperity, we still excel in those areas. But there are certainly areas where that America can teach the rest of the world some lessons on don't do this because it's been good and it's starting to fall apart.
Okay, so some of those areas, certainly if you look at freedom, America has traditionally been one of the freest nations in the history of the world, and that would include personal freedom, that would include economic freedom, things that really surround much of how American culture is run. And today, America is no longer even in the top 10 of the freest nations in the world. And specifically when it comes to economics, actually, if you look at personal freedoms, we might be even lower down, probably are lower down on that list. And certainly freedom is something that we would think is good for individuals. We've identified that every individual is born with inalienable rights. And those are rights that because there was a creator, because the creator made us as individuals, there were certain rights we were given because we have a creator. And we're seeing that some of those rights, some of those civil liberties are being taken away. But when we look at economics, we see this principle even in economics where we don't have the same freedom we used to have.
We don't have freedom in a lot of areas, not only economics, but a lot of it deals with regulations. And if you look at the purpose of government, and the Bible has been very influential in America in shaping much of the way we think, it's influential for any nation. By the way, the Bible applies anywhere it's used, in any nation, any point in time. But when you look at the Bible, we're told in the Bible the purpose of government and the purpose of law is to restrain the law breakers, not the law abiders. Government's supposed to reward the righteous and punish the wicked. And so what happens is you start adding regulations, you start regulating the good guys rather than the bad guys. Instead of dealing with just murderers and others, now you're dealing with fathers and housewives and business owners and placing regulations on them. And to give you an extent of what that means overall, when you've had a system of freedom and you start trying to regulate things in it, in a recent year here in America, we had 127 laws that were passed in the way that our Constitution says a law should be passed. It went through the House, it went through the Senate and Congress, it was signed by the President, it became a law for the entire nation. 127 in a 2-year period. In that same period of time, another 3,800 laws were issued, not through the Congress or the President, but by bureaucrats, by administrative agencies, and they have the effect of law because they impose penalties or fines. And so what happens, you have thousands of new laws, regulations being added every year. And one of the things we know about regulations is they increase the cost of doing business. As you put more and more onerous regulations on businesses, cost goes up. And here in America, almost 1/4 of the price that we pay for our products, like a loaf of bread or a gallon of milk, 1/4 of that price is to cover the cost of regulations on those businesses. So we're moving away from economic freedom because we're increasing regulations. And government should really be about making sure that there's a competitive, fair market, that you can't have a monopoly that has an unfair advantage so that no one else compete. Government should be about creating an even playing field and then backing off and saying, you guys compete. If your product works good, people buy it. If it doesn't, but we're not gonna force that.
Sure, and there's nothing wrong with saying there are certain boundaries, right? Government should uphold the standard, but it shouldn't play favorites.
Well, and the standard it should uphold really is that moral standard that we keep talking about. because you don't want a business doing things through treachery and deceit and immoral things. And so again, that's why government should regulate the bad guys, not the good guys. And there's certain moral things. We don't want you to steal from someone else. You can't steal their proprietary secrets and then you sell it. So we have copyright and patent protection and other things.
And you're saying they should regulate the bad guys, not the good guys. What you mean is that regulations passed should be to penalize people doing bad things. Because if we're law abiders, if you pass a law that says don't murder, oh, you're oppressing me. No, you're only in trouble if you're a murderer. So the regulation should be passed to penalize people that are doing something that is improper, that is immoral. It shouldn't be to hinder productivity. It shouldn't be to say, wait a second, you've made a little too much profit in your business this year. We're going to have to cut you back a little bit. No. We actually want to reward profit makers, and this is something in America we believed in individual responsibility, an individual opportunity, and this used to be known as capitalism, as a free market. But if you could be really productive, if you could grow crops, if you could make a lot of corn, let's say, you could sell your corn, you could eat your corn, you could trade your corn, but you are responsible and you get to enjoy the own benefits of what you do. And one of the principles we understood, and you see this throughout the history of the world, is the greater the government, the greater the poverty. The greater the freedom, the greater the wealth. And this has been proven throughout, again, the history of the world. Well, the American experiment, America, when we came into existence, this was something we actually tried, an early form of socialism. Actually, some of our early colonies, Jamestown and Plymouth, they thought we should just all share everything together.
And it did not work well for them. It seemed to be the fair thing to do. It seemed to be the right thing to do. But what they found out, for example, when you look at the people we call pilgrims who came here and founded part of what became Massachusetts, they came here as a congregation. They were a church congregation that came here from England. And when they got here as a church congregation, they wanted to look out for one another. But it turned out that they got here in winter, and a lot of them were sick. A lot of them were suffering from illness and whatever. And so what they did is say, look, as a congregation, whatever we can produce, we're going to share with everybody, which is great if that's voluntary. But out of 102 people, it turned out that only 7 or 8 healthy, able-bodied people were doing the work for everybody. And they can work hard, and people that aren't working hard are getting the same benefit of those that work hard. And suddenly the people that don't work hard say, this is a great deal, I'm just going to ride this. And the people who are working hard say, I don't see any reason for me to work hard because I'm working hard for everybody else, I'm getting nothing out of it. And so it became a disincentive. And by the 3rd year of their existence, they went to what we call the free market competitive system. This is something the Bible deals with. The Bible says, if you don't provide for your own household, you've denied the faith. Now, that's responsibility for my household,
Right.
But in socialism, I'm providing for everybody else's household.
Right.
But that's not, and you know, we talked in an earlier session about the laws of nature and nature's God, what's called natural law. And writers for 1,000 years have written about natural law. You know, it's a law in nature that if you look at certain species of animals, take the squirrel. We know that the squirrel is a gatherer, gathers acorns or nuts or whatever. Nothing in nature says, Mr. Squirrel, you've gathered too many acorns, you need to share them with everybody else. No. There's no socialism in nature. Whatever you can gather and hold is yours to keep. And so whether that be the alligators that kills food and buries it at the bottom of the lake, or whether that be cougars who kills food and buries it to come back to it later, there's no regulation on how much you can accumulate and keep. And so that's a natural law. And so what happens a lot of times, government says, oh, look, they've got a lot. Let's take some money from them and we'll share it with everyone else. Well, then they don't have an incentive to keep working and producing. And the other problem that happens with that is when government starts taxing income, as a business owner, there's no business in the world that actually pays taxes. When a business gets taxed, what they do is say, I'm going to have to raise the price of bread and pass that on to the consumer. It is the people who buy my product that will pay the tax. Because as a business, whatever I'm producing, I'm not going to pay. Now, I'll pay the government something because they tax me, but I'm going to raise my prices. So actually taxing the wealthy and taxing businesses ends up taxing everyone because they pass that on through what they do.
Well, one of the things that in America we understood for a long time, we believed in equality of opportunity, but not equality of outcome. We believed no matter what color, shape, or size you are, you should have the same opportunity to be successful, to be productive. You could have your own crop, your own field. You could be your own boss. You could have your own business. You have the opportunity, but there was no guarantee of success because maybe you're not really good at farming. Maybe you're not really good at making clothes. Maybe you're not really good in technology. Well, there's nobody that should say, hey, everybody should have the same thing because we all have different abilities. And it makes sense that we don't pay a heart surgeon, a medical doctor, we don't pay them the same that we pay someone to change the oil in our car. Why? Because they have different abilities. We don't reward people based on their shape, their size, or their color. No, even though everybody has the same opportunity to be a heart surgeon, not everybody can. That's a special ability. We reward people based on what they are able to produce, based on what they are able to provide. And the more valuable thing you can provide, you have a better opportunity to make more money. And that has nothing to do with the value of individuals. We don't say, wait a second, the heart doctor is worth more as a person than a mom who's at home raising the kids. No, the value of the individual is not determined on ability. But financially, where you find productivity is if you find something that is really valuable, why would we pay more to a heart surgeon? Because that's much more special. It's harder to find someone that can do that operation. I can go on YouTube and figure out how to change the oil of my car, so I shouldn't pay that person the same amount. I'm paying them for convenience, not for the knowledge they have that I can't achieve or attain. I'm paying a heart surgeon to do something that I cannot do no matter how many YouTube videos I watch. In America, we believed anybody could achieve anything, and so we believed in equality of opportunity, but we didn't all have the same outcome, and therefore not everybody should make the same amount. It really was based on what you could produce, what you could accomplish. You could receive a reward based on that.
And in America, we've always taken the position that when you unleash the people to reach their potential, you prosper as a nation. And we've seen that. We saw that with the Pilgrims, with the Puritans, with the Jamestown colony. All the early colonists that came from Europe came with a mentality of socialism, that we're going to be fair and share it with everyone. And we didn't prosper. But when we went to the biblical approach of a free market competitive system where that everyone does his own skills, like even in that community of the Pilgrims, I mean, not everybody had the same skill. So where they had been putting everything together, one guy says, you know, I'm really good at hunting. I don't know how to make hinges for my door. Now the smith does. Maybe I can trade a deer that I shoot for a pair of hinges for my door. And then the guy that makes the hinges, the blacksmith, says, you know, I'm really not good at sewing. Maybe I can trade a horseshoe for a set of clothes. And so you started this bartering thing where that everybody had their own skill and ability. Now, America also is giving the world a great example of what happens when you move away from that. Because we have been in a position of high prosperity, and now we're saying, oh, look at these businesses that are making all this money. We need them to share some of that money. And so what we have done in America is we have driven businesses out of America to other places in the world where they can have a lot freer business. So for a number of years, America has had the highest business tax of any nation in the world. And our big corporations are leaving and going elsewhere where they don't have to pay that tax. They can be competitive. And so we're seeing economic freedom slip in America because we're getting away from fundamental principles. And the key with the fundamental principle is it works in every generation, every age, every country, every demographic. It's not a 21st century principle. It's a timeless principle. And that's what we used to use in economics.
Well, even the idea of taxes, where we're pointing out that businesses that are more productive get taxed at a higher rate. It used to be in America that everybody was taxed the same rate regardless of how much you made. It's known as a flat tax. And the reason we did that is we understood everybody should be treated the same because we didn't believe that just because you were really productive, well, you need to give more of your productivity to us. No. Everybody. So, for example, if we said everybody's going to pay 10%, the argument is, wait a second, the rich people should pay more. And I feel like this would be a good time to explain percentages because if you have someone who's poor and they made $1,000 all year, that's pretty poor. If they pay 10%, they paid $100. If you have a wealthy person and that wealthy person made $1 billion that year and they pay 10%, they pay $100 million in taxes. So when people argue, but the wealthy should have to pay more, they do. The difference is we didn't believe people should be treated differently based on a status because we thought, no, we've all been created equal. It goes back to the Declaration that all men, all humanity has been created equal. So we don't government doesn't get to play favorites. We don't get to say, hey, I like them. Let's not tax them as much. Let's tax them more. I don't like them. No. We've all been created equal. That used to be the way taxes were done in America. Right. That changed at one point.
And you know, that approach to taxation is actually the biblical approach to taxation because God had everyone pay what was called a tithe. That was kind of like a tax, but it was all 10%. So as you've explained, the wealthy people paid more, the poor people paid a lot less, but they were all treated the same. Now, that's not the same outcome. That's the same treatment. And the Bible says God causes the rain to fall on the just and the unjust. He causes the sun to shine on the wicked and the righteous. He treats everybody with the same standards. And that's what we did. We actually had to change the Constitution of the United States to get into that different standard. And it's called a progressive income tax. And at the time, there was actually a movement. There was a political movement that showed up in education and government and law and everything about we need to throw off the past stuff. We want to do things different. And that kind of mentality led to we don't see all people equally. We see groups, and we want to place you into groups. Now that is known as identity politics. We don't just look at you and say, oh, you're human. We say, what group are you with? And now, are you gay? Are you straight? Are you senior? Are you young? Are you black? Are you white? Are you Hispanic? Are you Asian or Pacific Islander? We have to know what group you're with before we know how we think about you. And that's part of what the progressive movement back a century ago brought in was let's break everybody into groups. And that is not the same principle-driven status that says, no, all men are created equal. You all get treated the same, including on your taxes. Now, the rich will pay more than the poor, but we're going to treat you with the same standard. Now we use different standards, and that's another area where that America is moving in the wrong direction. That's common across the world that when you start having groups and you break into groups, then your groups start fighting with each other. That's where you get revolutions and conflicts and civil wars. That's what we see in Rwanda and Bosnia and elsewhere where we see these massive wars. It's one group against another group. And we combated that in America by saying we don't have groups, we have individuals, we have people. And so that's something that's dramatically changed now in America.
Well, as you mentioned, progressives have done things not just politically. You mentioned education. And certainly one of the changes we have seen in American education is a shift away from a lot of traditional things that were promoted in America. We mentioned one of the things that used to be promoted in America was a system of morality based on the Bible, because that was a standard we could point to and say, okay, here's where we learn right and wrong. Here's things we do and don't do. And it's not that you had to believe in Jesus. You didn't have to believe in the God of the Bible, but we learned the moral structure for America from the Bible. We had things that we actually taught different disciplines to kids. And we saw the level of productivity even from education, where it used to be that American education was the top in the world. Today, it's a little different. We're not really the top of the world anymore, especially for lower levels of education. And that's something that progressives had a major influence in changing a lot of the mindset of education.
They shifted a lot of the philosophy of education. And just look at the results of what they've done. Back in the 1960s, America was #1 in the world in literacy. We had the highest percentage of people who could read anywhere in the world. And yet, within about 30 years, we had dropped as low as number 68 in the world. I mean, we just plummeted. And if you look at the 24, what we call the industrial nations of the world, for the last 20 years, America comes in last, near last in math, in science, in reading, and all. So we have really fallen apart. And progressives came in, that group called progressives, that movement, they came in and said, we just need to do things different in education. We don't care that it's worked well for 200, 300 years. It's time to do something new. And so with no metrics, no measurement, they came in and said, you know, we've always put students into classrooms based on their abilities, but let's put them in based on their ages. And so suddenly...
And when you say based on abilities, it's based on knowledge.
Knowledge.
So it's based on content mastery.
That's right.
And also, that meant that you don't go to the next grade until you've mastered the content of the grade where you are.
That's right.
Because second level is after the first level. But if you don't know the first level, it's not time for the second level. You can't go to the seventh level if you don't know what's at the sixth level. And yet what we did is said, well, we don't really care what you know. Every year you should go to a new grade because it's a new year. It used to be based on content mastery, and actually that made us even look very different, because if it's just about the knowledge, about gaining the understanding, then we've put a different priority. It's not on age, it's on knowledge and understanding.
And if you look at age, you take 15-year-olds, there's some 15-year-olds that are super mature, but there's some 15-year-olds that are really immature. There's some 12-year-olds more mature than some 15-year-olds. So it's not your age. It was really that common thing of knowledge and where were you. And so as you look at what they did, putting people with age, you take a group of 15-year-olds, you're going to have some that are pretty slow and they don't work hard and they really don't care about being in school anyway. And so how does the teacher deal with those that are highly motivated and those that are not motivated when you're based on the same age? What you have to do is teach to the middle. So that forces you to be mediocre. You have to teach mediocrity. I'm going to try to maybe challenge the really smart kids, and I'm going to try to get the kids that are not smart interested. And so what you do is you teach to the middle, and that leaves everybody gets hurt out of that. We used to teach on knowledge level. So if you knew something, we could take you forward, and maybe you could go through 3 knowledge levels in a year, and maybe this guy would take him 2 years to go through 1 knowledge level, but we treated you as individuals. Now progressives treat you as groups, and as a result, our educational scores have plummeted.
Well, and this is also back when school was not mandatory. And I know it's kind of crazy today to think that you weren't required to go to school. We understood education is a privilege and an opportunity. A good education gives you the opportunity to be able to use your brain and make a professional career out of something other than just using your physical body to be a builder, to work construction, to build roads. That's a very hard lifestyle. And so we knew this is a special opportunity to get an education. And if students didn't want that opportunity, okay, if you want to build roads the rest of your life, fine. You don't have to stay in school. But by making students stay in school, by forcing every student in America, you have to go to this school, it puts kids who don't want to be there with kids who actually want to learn, which puts teachers in a difficult situation. And I understand there's some sentiment of, wait a second, but we want every student to know. Sure, there's a lot of emotions that are involved in the midst of what we do, but one of the things we tried to be careful of in America is that we did not run our nation based off an emotional decision and appeal. We had standards of right and wrong. We had metrics that we used, and if it doesn't make sense, if it doesn't work, let's not keep doing something that doesn't work. But as you mentioned, progressives don't seem to care. Yeah. This ideology, right? Because we could change the name. It doesn't have to use the name progressive.
That's right.
It could be any name they want to choose, but the ideology that really is what has led to even America embracing much more socialism. And this is what's kind of funny, because if you look at socialism, a lot of nations promote socialism, and it might make sense on some level. For example, if you're from Switzerland, and the only nation you've ever lived in was Switzerland, and you've been there your whole life, and you've grown up being a Swiss, and you've learned the Swiss way of life, and it's only you and your people in your community, socialism might work for you because everybody thinks the same. Everybody believes the same. The problem is we live in a culture and a world where actually there's a lot of immigrants coming in. Now, America, this would be a major problem. We have so many people from so many nations of the world. America used to be known as the melting pot of the world. Everybody was combined and we melted together, we made a nation. If everybody is thinking differently, then the ideas of socialism don't even, not even the practicality, the ideas don't even work, because if we go back to practicality, socialism also really only works when everybody works very hard and everybody has some level of skill that they can offer and be productive. Socialism doesn't allow for people that are lazy, that don't want to work, that don't want to be productive, but people emotionally say, but we still need to take care of them. Socialism has never been a successful system because it's never allowed for people who didn't want to be a part of the program, for people who didn't have ability and skill sets. And so ultimately, it's never really worked in nations in the world.
It is interesting that when you look at socialism, that is touted, especially in American academia, by professors and others, that this is a great system. It's a system that's fair. It's a system where you can achieve equality and you can achieve prosperity. And at this point in American history, we have roughly just under half of Americans who think socialism is really good. But then when you start asking them specifically, now you understand that in socialism, if you are really good at something and you can really make something 5 times more than someone else can, you're going to have to share that with, I don't think that's fair. I think what I make, when you start explaining what socialism is, most people don't like it. They think it's glamorous, but when you get into specifics, it doesn't work. And then on top of that, here's something interesting. Go back through 5,500 years of recorded history and find where socialism produced freedom and prosperity. Point to the nation that is now more free and more prosperous because they are socialist. It doesn't happen. It goes the other way. Those nations that are the most economically free are those that use the free market system, the competitive system, where the government only puts boundaries and makes sure that the playing field is level, but it doesn't choose winners and losers.
Well, and this is why even the idea of having freedom, we totally believed in freedom, but this is why we promoted in America for so long the idea of morals, because you should be free to be really productive and enjoy your own productivity. You should be able, if you're really talented, if you have an amazing idea, if you come up with an invention that actually makes millions or billions, you ought to be able to be a millionaire or billionaire. You ought to be able to do that and accomplish that. But where people argued and said, wait a second, but isn't there corruption in capitalism? Aren't people greedy? To which I would ask the question, can you name an economic system where there's not corruption? Where people aren't greedy? Can you name any system? See, the problem isn't the system. The problem is the people in the system, which is why in America, we said there has to be a moral structure upon which we base things, because if we have a system that says stealing is wrong, so even if you are a really wealthy, productive business owner, you can't steal from somebody else. You can't say, I need their property to grow my crops. I need their property for my cattle. No. You don't have a right to somebody else's stuff. And this is where, if you have a system of morality, there's been no system of economics that has raised more people out of poverty than capitalism, than the free market. In America, we've always touted the idea of freedom, of the free market, of you have choices. And what's happened is, in much more recent generations, there's been a real emotional appeal that, wait a second, it's not fair for everybody. And I feel like it's worth noting that most of life isn't fair. I don't know why we have this notion that everything should be fair, but we now in America are raising a generation that is so entitled, that thinks, well, the government owes me a cell phone, the government owes me health care, the government owes me a car, the government owes me. Why do we think the government owes you anything? No, we used to believe you have to earn it, and now we think the government should give it to us.
Well, this is one of the things that group we're now calling progressives, that group that had that mentality of divide you into groups instead of individuals. So this group came into education, and they have this elitist mentality that says, we know better than you know what you need, so we're going to tell you what you need. And so as they come in, this is what really leads to indoctrination. We used to have education was a search for truth. We're going to show you how you can develop tools to go find truth, to go find what works and what doesn't. We want to give you the skill set so that you can advance as an individual. And they started coming in and saying, no, here's what you need to believe. You need to believe that socialism is the best form of government out there. We used to teach you how to think. We now teach you how to learn, which means the teacher is the source of your knowledge. And so whatever philosophy the teacher picks up is what the students now reflect. That's why there's such a high percentage of Americans who think socialism is really good, because a high percentage of professors think it's really good, except it doesn't work anywhere, ever. So we're not concerned about truth, and we don't teach you to search truth. We know what we want you to do, and so we're going to do that. And that's part of the indoctrination that education has now become in America, and it's not good.
Well, and socialism actually, it seems like the most fair system there is. Socialism actually, it would seem to make sense that why can't we just all be together and we'll take care of each other? And it actually seems to make sense. And actually, we could argue there are some nations that are socialist, and it's actually worked for their nation, except they don't have freedom and they don't have prosperity. So, yeah, but their health care is covered. Well, sure. But you know what? If I'm free and I'm prosperous, I can buy health care. And actually, I can buy it cheaper than probably what the government is taxing me to help cover that. Do you know there are nations that 68, 70% of their income goes to the government? I mean, imagine you had a garden, and imagine you do all the work on this garden. You bought everything, you got the dirt, you got the seeds, you got the soil, you watered, you took care of everything every day. And then after you grow all your crops, the government comes along and says, we're going to need to take 7 out of every 10 things that you grew. And you're like, but what did you do? I did all the work. And they said, yeah, but we're going to have to. It's so we can take care of you. It's for your benefit that I'm taking this from you. How is that my benefit? This is actually what socialism does. If you don't want to be free and you don't want to be prosperous, socialism might not be bad for you. In America, we chose freedom and prosperity in a system that allowed people to become productive, to become prosperous. In America, there's not a group that can't be prosperous. In America, it doesn't matter what shape, what color, what size you are, you actually, if you enter into the market, if you work really hard, if you are a good employee, if you develop and work on your intellect and you're really smart at what you do, you can be very prosperous in America. But it's because in America, we reward that level of productivity. We reward this, and this is where you can look at nations. Venezuela is an interesting example because Venezuela is a socialist nation, except it hasn't been going so well for Venezuela recently.
Well, you know, let's take the other side of America, because we've been trending in the wrong direction, and we've been rapidly moving towards socialism, and then we had a recent election where that a different president came in and said, no, it's all about free market. And in a 2-year period of time, we have gone from a recessive economy to the most expanding economy we have had in American history in the last 30 or 40 years. We now have the lowest unemployment of 50 years. We now have higher wages. We now have everything going in a different direction, and it's a matter of 2 years because we changed the philosophy we're trying to head government. And so when you change that philosophy and head back in different, so you can have Venezuela, or you can have an America who's not doing well, or within 2 years an America that is doing well, and it's all about principles. The principles work every time they're applied.
And this is where it's not just about the political parties that you have.
That's right.
Where a lot of places think, well, this political party is the most important. Leaders are incredibly important. There's no doubt about it. A good leader can take a bad nation and make it great. A bad leader can take a great nation and make it bad. Leadership makes a difference, but what's important about the leader is what is the philosophy they're implementing. You might have a leader who's a really, really good person. This guy, this girl, she's so good. You know, no matter how good of a person they are, if they apply bad principles, it's just not going to go well for the nation. But you know, you can take a leader who's not really that good of a person, but if they apply good principles, your nation can be really successful. What matters so much is the principles that's applied, and even interestingly, right? So if we looked somewhere like North and South Korea.
I know where you're headed. You're going to say there's a difference between South Korea and North Korea, but I got to point out they really are two separate nations. I mean, the climates are totally different. The cultures are totally different. The backgrounds are totally different.
Different heritage, people.
It makes a difference that they would have different outcomes because they're totally different people. Maybe not.
So after the Korean War, North Korea says, you know what? Communism is awesome because it worked really well over the past decades. It's never worked well. But South Korea chose a system that actually promoted a free market, promoted freedom among people. And right now, you can look at South Korea. South Korea is one of the top 10 economic producers in the world. I mean, which is really remarkable because they're not one of the largest nations of the world, but they are so productive right now. North Korea still has people starved to death every single year.
By the millions, literally by the millions.
Over a period, I think it was over a period of 3 years, 2.5 million people starved to death. This is not a great system.
And try to find that level of poverty anywhere in South Korea. Try to find people in South Korea that are starving to death from hunger. It's not happening. Try to find the difference. The principles are the same. They work everywhere they're applied. You have North Korea that does not use those principles. And by the way, 20% of the world today is under communism. And try to find a communistic nation that is prospering and that is free. You have South Korea, who's gone in the opposite direction. A great example to see the difference is go to the web and look at the picture of the Korean Peninsula at night. Now, at night, you can't tell where the boundary line is, 38th parallel, except you can when you look at night pictures of prosperity, because South Korea is all lit up. They've got electricity everywhere. North Korea, you got kind of one or two places with a little bit of electricity. I would assume that's the dictator's palace is the only place,
probably.
you know.
Now, but I would interject because, now wait a second. China's a communist nation, and China seems to be having some economic productivity.
And it's interesting that China is abandoning its old system and is becoming more free market, as they've done with Hong Kong, and they're starting to be more competitive, and they're adopting those principles. And look at China starting to rise economically. Now, they don't have the freedom yet, but their economics is changing because they've moved away from that communist economic system more to a free market competitive system.
So in an idea that we did in America where everybody, all of humanity, everybody has been given equality and everybody is equal under the law. So you don't exempt a political leader from murder if murder is against the law. No, everybody's under the law. We also recognize everybody has rights. Everybody has the right to the freedom of their religion, to the freedom of speech. Everybody has certain basic rights. But part of what we understood is in the midst of everybody having the same basic structure and system of life, everybody also has the same opportunity. In America, there's only a few requirements to be the president of the United States. Actually, any American, for the most part, can become president.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, you look at the requirements for president, you've got to be 35, you're born in America. How many people have been born in America under 35? Lots and lots and lots of people.
Millions of people.
How many people have been president of the United States?
40-something, not many.
Now, they've all had opportunity to become that, and we have had, it's interesting, we've had several presidents who had no college degrees at all. We had several presidents who were businessmen, some who were military leaders, some who were teachers and educated. So you had the equality of opportunity, but the outcome wasn't the same for every American, but you still have that chance.
So different than socialism, different than communism, we believe in opportunity, but not necessarily outcome.
That's right.
So you have the opportunity to be successful, doesn't mean you have to be successful. And this is interesting because this is certainly something that even inside of Christianity is taught. That actually, because in Christianity there is a God and God's given you gifts and God's given you abilities and talents, well, what you do with those might be different on a success level and what you can accomplish and achieve. But just because you might be given gifts, talents, and abilities, so maybe you're good at sports, but maybe you never become a professional athlete. Well, we've all been given different levels, and we all, even though in America everybody can try to be a professional athlete, not everybody achieves that. Well, it's actually a principle even in Christianity that you have opportunity, but you actually can achieve different things. And this is where God judges us as individuals, even based on what we accomplish and achieve. And there's a lot of nations around the world that have tried to apply Christianity, that have taken some of these principles, and yet even a lot of nations today that would profess to be Christians, they have so much corruption.
That's right.
They have so many problems in their government, and they still have a tyrannical government and oppresses the people. So how can people that in theory believe in some of these principles that have helped America be successful, why hasn't it been successful in other nations?
It's interesting because we've been contacted recently. I'm thinking of one nation that professes 90% Christianity, another one 83% Christianity, another one 93% Christianity, and their biggest problem is corruption. Now, why would you have nations that were essentially 90% Christian and their government is corrupt from top to bottom? It goes back to the morals of the people. The Christian values were not taught to the people and their leaders. They may be Christian professing, but they're not Christian acting or biblical acting in the sense of having those morals. And if the people don't have those morals, then they're not likely to demand them from others. Now, they don't like it when people are corrupt, but yet they tolerated that when they elected those people. And that's why it's so important to get a foundation of biblical morality, biblical thinking. I mean, South Korea is a great example. When you had the end of World War II under the UN mandate, the southern part of Korea was put under U.S. control. The northern part of Korea was put under Soviet control. And so the religious beliefs, one was a very atheistic control in the north, and America, of course, was a very biblical control. We sent missionaries all into South Korea. And so South Korea has experienced a level of freedom and actually Christian thinking, even though not the whole nation is Christian. There's a lot of Christian foundation that was placed there after World War II. And then you saw the conflict with the Korean War, where the godless communists, as they were called, were attacking the free value system of religious liberty. And so you look at that, and there's a perfect example of if you can get Christian values in there. Now, we see a lot of nations with Christian name on it, but they don't have that moral fiber that it takes to have a good nation, and that's something that's got to be done. They're going to have to get that moral fiber, otherwise they will never get corruption out of their nation.
So what's more important than just what political party's in charge, than maybe do I like this elected official or not, or do they even profess some kind of religion? What's so important is what principles are they going to apply? Are those principles proven to have been successful? Can you measure the metrics of it and say, hey, you can look throughout the history of the world and governments and know this works or doesn't work. You know, South Korea is a great example because they've enjoyed so much freedom right now. And actually, sometimes even in the midst of prosperity, there are people that want to come to power, that want a piece of that money, that try. It's easy for corruption to come in when there's prosperity, but actually corruption will destroy prosperity pretty quickly. And this is why the principles that are applied are so important. America's a great example. We've had a lot of ups and downs in American history, and it's not always been about what political party was in charge. It's not always been about what was the religious background of the president. It's been about what principles did they apply, because there are principles that promote freedom. There are principles that will promote economic success. America's learned a lot of those lessons, and this is really the challenge, is what are the principles of freedom, and will they continue to be applied in the future? That's what's going to make the difference for America being successful. It's also what will make the difference for even nations like South Korea. Will they be successful?